Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. I thought this afternoon I'd talk about something that relates particularly to meditation, but actually has application broader than that. That are the two lists, negative and positive, the Nivarna and the Jhana factors. The Nivarna, usually translated as hindrances, are 5 mental habits or tendencies that prevent the mind from stabilizing. The hint as to their natures is given in the name Nivarna, which actually means a wrong way of walking or a wrong path. So if you think the metaphor, you're going on a journey and you have a straight road you can follow to your destination, but you take a side road instead and get lost wandering down endless cul-de-sacs. That's the nature of the Nivarnas. Yet they lead the mind on away from the goal and leave you confused and bewildered and far away from the main path. There are 5 of these: sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, anxiety, and uncertainty. Kamavachara, the first one, sensual desire, is the tendency of the mind to become attached to or obsessed with sense objects. And this is very natural tendency of the mind because of our nature as human beings. We're part of the sense desire realm, and our default mode of operation is through the 5 senses. And we seek out pleasant sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and touches. And they're either physically present in actuality, or the mind conjures them up in imagination. So that's actually the mind sense, but it's relating to objects of the 5 senses. That's why on a meditation retreat, one of the most important disciplines to maintain is Indriya Samvara, sense restraint, because it's very challenging to train the mind to seek internal interest and satisfaction and not seek amusement and diversion out through the senses. And we're not just talking about gross examples of obvious examples of sense desire, but just letting the mind wander out through the senses is a distraction from the task at hand. This is also the reason for the 8 precepts, which are an aid to maintaining Indriya Samvara, because they close off by precept several avenues of possible sense diversion. The second one, ill will, vyapada, in some respects it's simply the inverse of sense desire. It's the aversion to unpleasant objects. But it has a somewhat different nature in that sense desire can be experienced as pleasant or desirable, but ill will is always painful. It's always immediately, directly increases the suffering in the mind. To have aversion, ill will, hatred, anger, all these are aspects of vyapada. Subtle forms that can occur in meditation are irritation at conditions. Maybe it's too noisy, it's too hot, your seat is too hard, your leg is getting stiff, and you experience irritation. And that is what hinders the development of samadhi, not the external conditions. External conditions will never be perfect. There's no such thing as finding absolutely perfect external conditions. So we do our best to make the external conditions as conducive as possible. If it's possible to reduce the irritation by warming up the room or by changing your seat or what have you, then that's quite sensible to do. But in the end, you get past vyapada not by perfecting the external conditions, because that can never be done, but by not letting them become a source of irritation. See them just as they are in their own nature and not feel attachment or aversion. Sloth and torpor is tinamida. And the reason it's given that double name is explained in the commentaries, that tina is dullness of the chitta, and midda is dullness of the chittasikas. That may be a contrived explanation, but because it's a double word in Pali, then the translators seek a double word in English. They call it sloth and torpor. It's dullness of the mind in general. Sluggishness, dullness, sleepiness. It can be a difficult one to break once it sets in, because by its nature it is a low energy state. And the way to overcome it is to raise the energy level. So that can be done in a number of ways. Most immediate and often most important is the posture, making sure you don't succumb to slouching, but to keep an upright posture. If dullness persists, then brisk walking meditation or sitting meditation with the eyes open, or many other sort of things that will add energy and brightness to the mind. The visualization of light is especially recommended. And take that up as a practice, trying to visualize a bright light and cut through the sloth and torpor, which is a subjective feeling of darkness. Anxiety is the tendency of the mind to run around in circles. And it's actually, this is also a double one because it's in Pali as Udacha Kukucha. And because there's a kind of a rhyming, somewhat rhyming sound to the Pali, so the English translators sometimes go for worry and flurry. But Udacha and Kukucha are actually slightly different. There's Udacha is restlessness and shows up in other lists just by itself under that name, and Kukucha is what we would call anxiety. So in both cases it's a aggravated movement of mind. The mind is not still, so it's quite the opposite of samadhi. The mind gets lost in thought formation, particularly. And anxiety is, for some people, anxiety is a big problem. They get caught in it, in loops, mentally rehearsing previous events of their life or projecting future scenarios, usually worst case scenarios, and getting caught in those. And it becomes a self-feeding loop, positive feedback loop. It just keeps going and going. You know, one important principle to bear in mind is that nobody has ever thought their way out of anxiety. There may be the temptation, if you're caught in one of these loops, to think that you can solve it somehow, think it through and solve it, but it then just ends up adding new layers of complication to it. Things that just stop it, just cut through it. The particularly recommended antidote is mindfulness of breathing, because it's such a peaceful bodily process. It's quite the opposite of agitation. The last one, Wicikitcha, is translated either as uncertainty or as doubt. And this is also a kind of wavering of mind, but it's a specialized kind of wavering. And the mind craves some kind of certainty. It wants an answer, but it can't settle on an answer. So it goes back and forth. You should bear in mind, first of all, that unless you're a fully enlightened Buddha, you're not going to have all the answers. You're not going to know everything. It's not possible to know everything. And you don't need to know everything. So you can leave things just as undetermined in your mind. You don't have to settle everything. I know for myself, earlier on in my practice, it would bother me a lot if I read, and I was reading a lot of Dhamma books, and if I found two teachers who contradicted each other had made some statement that was irreconcilable to each other, that would bother me. I felt like I had to determine which one was correct. And the incidences of that just kept piling up. And finally I come to the conclusion it doesn't really matter. Maybe they're both right in some way, maybe they're both wrong, maybe one's right and one's wrong. I don't know. I can leave it as an open question. And it can actually aid my practice and my understanding if I examine in both points of view and allow the possibility of their being true. So getting past Wicikitcha is not necessarily being certain about everything, but it's just being content with an open mind. It doesn't feel the need to settle every question immediately. So you can see in general, if we look at these 5 factors, you can see what they have in common is that they unsettle the mind. The mind can't stabilize and develop samadhi when these factors are present. And when these factors are not present, when they're quiescent, then the mind naturally stabilizes and samadhi naturally deepens. It's almost a synonym. Jhana is almost a synonym for the absence of the 5 nivaranas. The mind just naturally gravitates that way. And instead of these 5 nivaranas, then we have the 5 factors of jhana: Vitakka, Vichara, Piti, Sukha, and Ekaggata. Vitakka and Vichara are a pair. They're associated closely with each other. And they've been translated in various ways. A common one is applied and sustained thought. Another one is initial and sustained application of mind. Outside of the strictly technical usage in meditation, Vitakka and Vichara are factors of mental activity, and together they work as the basis of cognitive thought and speech. So they're the manipulating of mental energies. Vitakka is the more vigorous of the two, and it's defined as the striking of an object with the mind. So the mind is making a definite movement towards an object. And vichara is the sustained holding of the object. Once it's been struck, then it's held. So vitakka comes first, and then vichara continues the sustaining of the object. So how they work in meditation is that vichara is the more peaceful and continuous factor. So it's the one that should be emphasized. And vitakka comes into play when the mind is starting to waver and you need to refresh your attention to the object. Then you make this deliberate mental effort to take the object. But once it's taken, then the vitakka then becomes counterproductive. You keep striking the object again and again. This is what happens, I think, when people, and I've often made this point, that I don't like the translation of samadhi as concentration, and I think this what, in a technical sense, what's happening sometimes with people who try to concentrate on the object is that they keep striking it again and again with vitakka. You have to learn the skill of just steadily holding the object. It's been compared to holding a raw egg in your hand. The application of vichara. If you're too loose, then your hand is too loose, then the egg can roll out and fall on the floor and make a mess. But if you're too rigid with your hand and squeeze the egg, it'll break and make a mess in your hand. So you have to find that sweet spot, that ideal amount of of just steady, sustained attention. And as long as Vitakka and Vichara are still present in the mind, there's going to be some degree of thought formation. The skill here is not to be caught in the thoughts, which will lead you into the nivaranas, but to just let them pass through like clouds passing through the sky. But Vitakka and Vichara are relatively crude factors, and they fade away, and when they're dissipated, when they're no longer present, then that is defined as second jhana, where the factor of piti is predominant. And piti and sukha also are considered to be a pair, because they're two forms of the same kind of mental energy, a coarser and a more subtle form. And they've been translated also in various ways. A common one is to translate piti as rapture and sukha as bliss. Piti is energetic kind of happiness. It's a joy, it's a brightness in the mind. And it's often noted that it has physical expressions. It's important to remember it's actually a mental factor, but it does have like effects on the body. That when piti is present, there will be various sensations in the body. Like very common is feeling like a tingling, spine rushes. Sometimes it results in movements of the body. The common one is to move the upper body around in circles, spiral kind of motion. The recommendation here is if it's causing the body to move, you should gently, without being too forceful, gently make the body still, like suppress that motion, because that if you don't do it abruptly, if you're gentle with it, you don't destroy the piti, but you cause it to manifest in a more subtle way, because there are grades of piti, from coarser to more subtle forms. The most subtle form is listed as the uplifting piti, which is experienced as a lightness of the body. And there's a subjective feeling like you're floating. You can actually feel like you're floating off the floor. And the sensation can be so strong that sometimes the meditator will become a little bit alarmed and open their eyes to see if they're actually levitating. And of course that breaks the samadhi. But the sensation is that sort of realistic. Piti is relative to sukha is relatively coarse because it has this energetic quality and there's a movement to it, so it's not completely conducive to stillness. And then eventually that fades, and we call it the third jhana, when the piti has faded away and sukha becomes the predominant factor. Sukha is profound happiness, sense of well-being. It's translated as bliss. There's no thrilling or exciting aspect to it. It's just a very expansive, oceanic, peaceful kind of happiness. And the only physical correlate is a complete feeling of well-being in the body. No stress or tension anywhere in the body, but there's no movement. And of course that's transcended in fourth jhana, which is based on upekkha, the equanimity that replaces sukha, which is a profound peacefulness and an evenness of mind. So there the samadhi has reached a point of perfection. The stability of the mind is complete. It's not disturbed by anything. And there is a corresponding stage in vipassana insight meditation, is equanimity about formations, when the mind is also peaceful and undisturbed. But in the vipassana state, there's this difference in that the mind is not completely still. It's still taking objects, but it does so with complete equipoise. Nothing disturbs it. And the last jhana factor to mention is in some ways the most important. It carries through all the states of jhana. There's almost a definition of it, is ekaggata. And that's another one where the translation is problematic. The standard translation you'll see in books all the time is one-pointedness. And that has the same problem as concentration. I prefer to use the translation unity of mind, or singleness of mind, that the mind is not divided. There's a unity of mind in that this becomes synonymous with stillness. Is the mind is not divided into various activities and objects, but is very stable. But it's not one-pointed in that it doesn't, and this is the key thing to understand, it doesn't narrow itself down onto the object to achieve that stillness. The mind with jhana is vast, expansive, open mind, but it's still, it's stable. So that great, vast, expansive emptiness is filled with but a single object. So it's in the case of the breath meditation, the breathing in and breathing out fills this entire expanse of mind. The mind is boundless. It's not a mind that has narrowed itself onto the object. And that's very important to grasp that distinction. And the other key point to bear in mind is that this is a natural state of mind. It's not something additional to the nature of mind. It's mind finding its own true home, its primordial state. And it will naturally gravitate into that state when the nivaranas are made quiescent. It's the nivaranas that distract and prevent the mind from experiencing and resting in the jhana factors.